An 8-year-old girl's simple question, the smallest person in the room, silenced a crowded town hall and left Karoline Leavitt sharing a deeply personal story about faith loss and redemption. And what happened next moved everyone to tears. The church fellowship hall in Concord, New Hampshire, hummed with quiet conversation, the rustle of coats, the gentle clinking of coffee cups against folding tables. It was a far cry from the roaring political rallies that often defined campaign stops. Here the atmosphere was different, more intimate, more personal. The space, usually home to Sunday worship and Bible studies, carried the scent of old wood and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The audience gathered was a mix of local families, retirees, and churchgoers, their faces etched with curiosity and quiet expectation. At the front of the room stood Karoline Leavitt, a woman known for her sharp intellect, her confidence, and her ability to command a crowd. Yet tonight, there was something softer in her demeanor. She scanned the faces before her, not just voters, not just supporters, but people searching for something more than politics, something deeper. And soon she would be confronted with a question that would strip away the usual campaign rhetoric and bring forth something far more profound. In the middle of the crowd sat Olivia, an 8-year-old girl with wide, thoughtful eyes and a leather-bound Bible resting on her lap. It was old, its pages delicate with age, its corners softened from years of loving use. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who had always told Olivia that faith was something you carried in your heart, no matter what. Her mother had leaned down before they arrived and whispered, "If you're brave enough, and only if you truly mean it, you can ask." Olivia had nodded, pressing the Bible against her chest as if drawing strength from its worn cover. She had spent weeks practicing her question, scribbling it onto scraps of paper, whispering it into the quiet of her bedroom at night. It wasn't just a question, it was something she needed to understand. The evening unfolded as expected. Karoline spoke of leadership, policy, the future of America. The crowd listened attentively, nodding in approval, clapping at key moments. Olivia waited. Her fingers traced the faded gold lettering on her Bible as her heart pounded. Then the moment arrived. The floor opened for questions. Adults surged forward, eager to discuss laws, the economy, the state of the nation. Olivia hesitated, her small frame sinking slightly into her chair. A warm, familiar hand touched her back, her mother's gentle encouragement, a silent reminder. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about stepping forward despite the fear. And with a deep breath, Olivia stood. The movement was small, but it commanded attention. The chatter softened as people turned, watching the tiny figure clutching a Bible, making her way toward the microphone. The microphone was tall, nearly too high for her, but she reached up, steadying herself. Kaorline noticed her then. Her sharp eyes softened, her expression shifting from practiced poise to quiet curiosity. "And what's your question, young lady?" Kaorline asked, her voice warm yet expectant. Olivia's fingers tightened around her Bible, her knuckles white. She took a breath, willing her voice to be steady. "Mrs. Leavitt," she asked, her voice small but clear, "what does God mean to you?" Olivia's question, the impact was immediate. A hush fell over the hall, so absolute that even the creaking of chairs seemed to vanish. The air grew thick with an unspoken weight, one that settled over every person in the room. Kaorline didn't answer right away. She had answered thousands of questions in her career, often without hesitation, without pause. But this was different. She looked at Olivia, at the Bible clutched in her tiny hands, and something flickered in her expression. A memory? A realization? For the first time that evening, she had no quick response. The audience, once lively, sat frozen in anticipation. Eyes darted between the young girl and the woman at the podium, waiting, needing to hear what she would say. Kaorline exhaled slowly, her fingers resting lightly on the podium. "That's a big question," she finally admitted, her voice quieter than before. "And it's not one I've always had the answer to." Olivia remained still, watching, waiting. "I remember sitting in church as a little girl," Kaorline continued, her voice softer now, almost reflective. I would stare at the stained glass windows, watching the light shine through, wondering if God was really listening. I wasn't sure. I had questions, many questions, and for a long time I wasn't sure if I'd ever get the answers. She paused, glancing toward the crowd, then back at Olivia. But my father used to tell me something that stuck with me. He'd say, faith is like a ladder. You climb one step at a time. Sometimes you slip. Sometimes you don't know if you'll ever reach the top, but you keep climbing because there's something up there worth reaching for. The words lingered in the silence, hanging in the air like something sacred. Around the room, people nodded, some blinking back tears. Kaorline leaned in slightly, as if speaking not just to Olivia, but to everyone. I didn't always understand what he meant. And truthfully, there were times in my life when I stopped climbing, when I felt like I was slipping, like I had no idea if God was even there. She exhaled. But faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about believing that, even when you don't see the whole picture, there's something greater at work. And in that moment, the town hall wasn't about politics. It wasn't about policies or campaigns. It was about something deeper, something unshakable, and no one wanted to look away. And in that moment, the town hall wasn't about politics. It wasn't about policies or campaigns. It was about something deeper, something unshakable, and no one wanted to look away. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of Kaorline's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The usual rustling of seats, the occasional murmur of agreement that often punctuated political gatherings, gone. Instead, the fellowship hall in Concord, New Hampshire, was wrapped in something deeper, something more profound. Silence, but not emptiness. A silence filled with reflection, with something raw and unspoken. At the center of it all stood Olivia, her small frame rigid, her hands gripping the Bible so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her lips quivered slightly, her wide eyes shimmering with unfallen tears. And then, one tear broke free. It trailed down her cheek, catching the glow of the overhead lights, before falling onto the worn leather cover of her grandmother's Bible. She clutched it even closer, as if it could steady her, as if it could hold her together. Kaorline noticed. She took a slow breath, her sharp, practiced confidence giving way to something softer, something personal. She stepped slightly away from the podium, as if closing the gap between herself and the girl who had silenced the entire room with one simple, aching question. "What's your name?" Kaorline asked, her voice gentle now, absent of the political cadence she often carried. Olivia hesitated for only a moment before whispering, "Olivia." Kaorline smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "That's a beautiful name." She knelt slightly, just enough so that she wasn't towering over Olivia, but instead meeting her at eye level. The shift did something to the atmosphere of the room. It was no longer a town hall. It was no longer a stage. It was simply a woman and a child, sharing something sacred in the presence of witnesses. "You know, Olivia," Kaorline continued, "sometimes the hardest questions are the ones that remind us of what truly matters." A sniffle echoed from somewhere in the audience. A man near the back cleared his throat, his weathered hands folded tightly in his lap. A woman in the second row clutched a tissue, dabbing at the corner of her eye. It wasn't just Olivia who had been affected. Kaorline exhaled, her expression shifting again, this time to something heavier. "I want to tell you something, Olivia," she said. "Something I don't talk about often." The audience leaned in. "I once felt lost," she admitted. "I once felt abandoned by God. I once thought maybe, just maybe," he had stopped listening. Another ripple through the crowd, a quiet inhale here, a deep sigh there. Kaorline's fingers traced the edges of the podium, as if grounding herself. "There was a time in my life when I thought faith was something that only belonged to other people. People who had unwavering belief, people who never questioned, never doubted. But that wasn't me." She looked back at Olivia. "There were moments when I felt completely alone, like no matter how hard I prayed, no matter how much I begged, there was no answer. Have you ever felt that way?" Olivia hesitated, then nodded. A small, trembling nod, but a nod nonetheless. Kaorline gave a knowing, almost bittersweet smile. "I think we all have." More nods from the audience. quiet, almost invisible gestures of agreement. But I learned something, Kaorline continued. I learned that faith isn't about never questioning. It's about holding on even when the answers don't come easily. Even when the silence feels unbearable. She turned her gaze back to the crowd. Faith is not about having all the answers. It's about trusting that somewhere, somehow, there's a greater plan, even when we don't see it. A soft sob escaped from the front row. The older woman, who had been silent the entire night, pressed a hand over her heart. Kaorline's eyes flickered back to Olivia, her voice soft but steady. And Olivia, I didn't learn that lesson on my own. I had someone who showed me. She straightened slightly, taking another breath. My brother, Michael. And just like that, the room fell into silence once more. For a moment, Kaorline's gaze was somewhere far away, somewhere beyond the bright stage lights, beyond the expectant stares, somewhere deep in the past. My brother Michael was the best person I knew, she said, her voice carrying a deep reverence. He was kind, he was patient, and he always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. She let out a quiet chuckle, though there was pain woven into the sound. He used to tell me that I worried too much, that I thought too much, that I tried too hard to control things that were never mine to control. A pause. And then, one day, he was gone. The air in the room grew heavier. People held their breath. Kaorline swallowed hard. It wasn't fair. It didn't make sense. I was angry. At life. At the world. At God. Another breath. Another moment of silence. I remember sitting in my room, staring at the ceiling, demanding answers. I remember saying, why him? Why not me? Why do bad things happen to good people, while others, people who don't deserve another chance, get to keep going? The question lingered in the air, unspoken but understood by many in the room. And do you know what answer I got? Kaorline asked, her voice softer now. The audience remained still, waiting. She exhaled. None. The admission was stark, honest, painful. I heard nothing, she continued. No booming voice from the sky, no whispered reassurance, just silence. She looked down, her fingers pressing into the wood of the podium, and that silence almost broke me. A shifting in the audience, people nodding, understanding. But then, she said, her voice growing steadier, one night I had a dream, and in that dream, Michael was there. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. He looked like he always did, that same easy smile, that same light in his eyes. She exhaled, and he said, don't be angry, Kaorline. You have work to do. A single sob echoed from somewhere in the room, the sound of someone being moved beyond words. Kaorline let her words settle before speaking again. I woke up and I realized something. Faith isn't about knowing everything. It's about trusting that, despite the pain, despite the loss, there is still a purpose. She turned back to Olivia, her expression soft but sure. Even when we don't understand, even when we don't see it yet, faith means trusting that there's a reason. Olivia sniffled, but this time when she blinked up at Kaorline, there was something steadier in her gaze. Kaorline smiled. And that's why I keep climbing the ladder, Olivia. She reached out, placing a gentle hand over the worn leather of Olivia's Bible. Because maybe, just maybe, there's something up there worth reaching for. The room, silent, still, completely captivated, remained in that moment, in that story, in that truth. And then, as if carried on the weight of everything unsaid, the first person in the audience began to clap. It was slow, hesitant, as if breaking some sacred silence. Then another, and another, until the entire hall was filled with the sound of hands meeting, of emotions rising, of people understanding that tonight, something had shifted. Something had changed, and none of them would leave quite the same as they had arrived. And right at this moment are the moments of contemplation of the audience. A murmur swept through the room, a ripple of quiet contemplation. Kaorline's words had cracked something open, something that had been carefully guarded in the hearts of many sitting before her. This was no longer just a political gathering. It had become something else, A moment of shared vulnerability, of deep reflection, of unspoken fears finally given air. A hand went up near the back of the room. The man who stood was older, perhaps in his 60s, with deep lines etched into his face from years of hard work and hardship. His denim jacket was worn at the elbows, and his hands were calloused. Working hands, the kind that told a story before a single word was spoken. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of an unspoken burden. "I've struggled with faith my whole life," he admitted, his eyes flickering between Kaorline and Olivia. "I was raised in the church, but somewhere along the way, I lost my way. Or maybe I stopped believing that faith had a place for a man like me." A quiet hum of understanding filled the air, nods from those who recognized his struggle. Caroline's expression softened as she took a slow step forward. "Faith is messy," she said, her voice gentle but sure. "It's complicated, uncertain. It's not neat, and it's not always easy." She paused, letting her words settle before adding, "But that's what makes it powerful." The man exhaled, something flickering in his expression. Relief, maybe. A quiet acknowledgement that his struggle was not his alone. And then, from her place near the front, Olivia shifted. She blinked up at Kaorline, then glanced at the man, her small hands still wrapped around her Bible. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft, but carrying through the silence. "My grandma used to say faith is like planting seeds," she said, her words careful, deliberate. "You don't always see them grow right away, but you have to believe that they will." A hushed stillness followed her words, a moment of profound, unguarded truth from a child who carried wisdom beyond her years. The man swallowed hard. He nodded once, his gaze falling to the floor as he let out a quiet breath. Then when he looked up, there was something lighter in his expression. "Maybe I stopped watering mine," he murmured. "Maybe I stopped believing it was worth the wait." Kaorline offered a small, knowing smile. "Maybe," she said, "but it's never too late to start again." From the far side of the room, another voice broke the silence. A woman, her hair streaked with silver, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, spoke next. Her voice trembled, but there was strength in it too. "I lost my husband last year," she said, barely above a whisper. "We were married for 43 years, and when he died, She stopped, pressing her lips together, steadying herself. "I felt like I lost everything, including God." The confession landed heavy. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She only looked at Kaorline, searching for something, maybe hoping that someone could tell her she wasn't alone in what she felt. Kaorline's gaze softened. She didn't rush to respond. She didn't try to fix what couldn't be fixed. Instead, she simply stepped forward, as if closing the distance between them made the words she was about to say more real, more personal. "Faith isn't something that disappears forever," she said, her voice steady, filled with quiet conviction. "It waits for you, and sometimes it comes back when you least expect it." The widow closed her eyes for a moment, breathed. Then she nodded, not in certainty, not in full understanding, but in recognition that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone in her grief as she thought. The moment stretched, raw and sacred. And in that moment, the walls between strangers seemed to fade. This wasn't just about Kaorline anymore. It wasn't even just about Olivia. This was about every person in that room who had questioned, who had struggled, who had doubted. It was about something far greater than any single conversation. It was about faith and what it meant to hold on to it. Now, the air in the fellowship hall had shifted. There was a weight to the moment, a feeling of something shared, something unspoken but deeply understood. Kaorline let the silence linger for a beat longer before speaking again, her voice filled with quiet reverence. "We live in a world where everything feels so divided," she said, "where people are always looking for reasons to push each other apart." Her gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of those who had just shared their stories, their vulnerabilities. "But faith," she continued, "faith has the power to bring us together, not because we all believe exactly the same way, but because, deep down, we all know what it feels like to struggle, to doubt, to hope." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Kaorline exhaled, then turned toward Olivia, the little girl who had started it all. She stepped forward, kneeling slightly so they were at eye level. The room held its breath. "Thank you, Olivia," she said, her voice sincere, unwavering. "You have more courage than most adults." Olivia, though still blinking away the last traces of tears, looked steadier now. She hesitated for only a moment before extending her small hand toward Kaorline. "Thank you, Mrs. Leavitt," she said, her voice stronger than before, "for answering." The handshake, small and simple, somehow carried more weight than anything else that had been said that night. A moment passed. And then, applause. It began softly at first, a few hands meeting in quiet appreciation. Then it grew. People stood, wiping at their faces, clapping not just for Kaorline, not just for Olivia, but for something far greater than either of them, for the truth that had been spoken, for the reminder that faith, even when shaken, even when uncertain, was still worth holding on to. Kaorline stood, nodding once in gratitude before taking a final look at the crowd. And as she turned to exit the hall, Olivia looked up at her mother, her voice soft but sure. Grandma would have been proud, wouldn't she? Her mother's eyes glistened as she pulled her daughter close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "More than proud," she whispered. "She would have been amazed." And as the hall slowly emptied, as people lingered, exchanging quiet smiles, hushed conversations, one thing was clear. Sometimes the bravest questions lead to the most unexpected answers. And in those answers, we find something far greater than we ever imagined. And if this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on your own faith. Share it with someone who might need it today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and bring us closer together.